Draw this or take a picture of it or okay. It kind of has a resemblance to what you're seeing right here. Okay? So this H in the middle of the diagram is called gray matter. Anybody remember why we call gray matter gray matter? It's not myelinated. And what two major regions of a nerve cell is not myelinated? The cell body and the dendrites, the receiving areas. All right? So that's what primarily makes up this gray matter, are the cell bodies of neurons and their receptive areas. This area out here is white matter because it's made up of the long nerve processes, the axons, and the central processes of the sensory neurons that are mostly myelinated. So we have collections of cell bodies, and then we have these long columns or tracts of fibers that are ascending or descending in the white matter. Okay? Now I'm going to illustrate a rule that we're going to see over and over throughout the nervous system, and that is the fact that anterior or ventral structures tend to be primarily motor in function, and posterior or dorsal structures are sensory. So our frontal lobe of our brain is voluntary motor. Parietal, temporal, and occipital lobe are all sensory, where we process pain, touch, temperature, vision, hearing, senses. All right? So again, the frontal structure is a motor structure. You'll see that over and over and over as we go through the components of the neuroanatomy. Now, I'm going to label structures. I'm just going to do letters on here and then put the labels over on the side to make it less messy. And then I'm going to draw sensory and motor neurons in. Okay, so an illustration similar to this one right here with nothing on it. I will put on D2L when I get to office hours this afternoon. And then I will put on another, there'll be two diagrams, one that has the sensory and motor neurons. Okay? And then you can print this off and practice labeling them or whatever it is you wish. So first of all, something that you are familiar with, and that's this structure right here, the central canal. Anybody remember the type of neuroglial cells that line the central canal and the ventricles of the brain? Dependable cells, okay? And along with the vascular tissue, the capillaries of the choroid plexus will make the CSF. All right. Now let's label the gray matter, okay? And again, these are collections of cell bodies. Some are sensory cell body neurons, some are motor neurons. So this region back here, kind of this whole area right here that I'm waving back and forth, is called the posterior gray horn. It really runs the entire length of the spinal column. So it's more of a column than it is a horn, but in cross-section it looks like a horn. So posterior gray horn. For years I spelled gray with an A, and now I'm trying to do it with an E, and it still feels awkward.
Oh, I'm looking. On mine it's A.
Yeah.
That's because that's for years I did it with.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, I'm like, on mine it's A.
All right, so then that's posterior, because this is the posterior. This would be closest to the spinous process of the vertebra, and this is anterior, so closest to the cell body. So again, if we look at this diagram, this is reversed. This is posterior down here, so you can see the posterior gray horns extend all the way out to the edge of the spinal cord. All right? So keeping that straight, that's why that's posterior. And then only in about half of the spinal cord do we have this in the thoracic lumbar region. But this area is the lateral gray horns. We'll pay more attention to that in our next unit because this has to do with autonomic, the visceral motor. And then this area is anterior gray horn. Okay, anterior is motor. So the cell bodies that we find in the anterior gray horn are all multipolar neurons for a motor. Same thing on this side. Okay, the spinal cord is balanced, mirror image. So just because I labeled everything on that side doesn't mean it doesn't have the same structure on this side. All right, and the last of the gray matter is this band of cell bodies that connects the two parts. And this is known as the gray commissure. Commissure means bridge. Okay. Now let's name the white parts of the spinal cord. So I'm going to identify these areas. So again, posterior, we have the posterior white column, or if you wish, the dorsal white column. This is made of mostly myelinated neurons that would be traveling out into the room or behind the board. Okay. This area is the lateral aspect of the spinal cord. So this whole area here is the lateral white column, and one on the opposite side as well. And then this area right here where my hand is anterior white column.
Where do 7 and 8 separate?
Kind of in here. And then this area across here is known as the anterior white commissure. So we have the gray commissure. There's a posterior white commissure, but we're not going to deal anything with it, so I'm not going to bother labeling it. So 9 would be the anterior. White commissure. Okay, so that's the structure of the spinal cord. And now we look at the roots and the spinal nerve and its branches. Okay. So as we look on this screen, this region right here is the spinal nerve. And immediately it divides into a very large anterior branch and a very small posterior branch. Okay. The spinal nerve is attached to the spinal cord via these rootlets, which combine to make a ventral or anterior root and a dorsal or posterior root. Okay, I haven't drawn the rootlets, I just draw the roots. So here would be the dorsal root of the spinal cord. I'm running out of room here. here would be the ventral root. Of the spinal nerve. And then this would be the spinal nerve. Just this narrow section right here, and then it has branches. Again, same thing on that side. So the two branches of the spinal nerve are known as rami. So this would be the dorsal ramus. Smaller branch. And this would be the ventral ramus. So over here would be spinal nerve, a little bit wider than I drew there. Okay? And dorsal ramus and ventral ramus. Now we have one structure left to identify, and that is this structure, which is the dorsal root ganglion. Okay. So if you want to take pictures, go ahead. So a collection of nerve cell bodies inside the central nervous system is the nucleus. That's what's forming up the gray horns that you see there, are various nuclei. A collection of nerve cell bodies outside the central nervous system is a ganglion. So that's why we call the dorsal root ganglion a ganglion, because it's a collection of cell bodies outside the central nervous system. So if you were to identify dorsal root ganglion, it's going to belong to the peripheral nervous system, whereas the posterior gray horn is going to belong to the central nervous system.
So that last one again. Okay, so
Okay.
posterior.
The dorsal root ganglion would be part of the peripheral nervous system. It's outside the central nervous system. The posterior gray horn, or the anterior
Central
gray
nervous
horn,
system.
would be central nervous system, because it's part of the spinal cord.
Posterior dorsal.
All right. So now what I want to do is to clear the decks, so it doesn't look quite so complicated, and erase the terminology. Okay? So I can draw in the neurons without your brain feeling as cluttered as the board looks.